It was a calm spring evening in Seattle, the kind that made everything look softer under the setting sun. Claire Bennett had just come home from the grocery store, her arms full of paper bags, her mind running through a list of small things she needed to finish before dinner. The scent of lilacs floated through the air as she stepped into her garden, the one place that always made her feel grounded. She stopped for a moment, breathing in the cool breeze. She noticed a figure sitting quietly on the wooden bench near her rose bushes. At first, she thought it was her son Ethan, but as the man turned his head, she realized it wasn't him, it was Ryan, Ethan's best friend. Ryan stood up immediately when he saw her, looking both polite and a little nervous. "Hey, Mrs. Bennett," he said, his tone soft and respectful. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wait without asking. Ethan told me he might be home soon, so I thought I'd wait here for a bit." Claire smiled lightly, placing her groceries down near the steps. "That's all right, Ryan. You're always welcome here," she replied. She noticed how uneasy he looked, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders a little tense. Ryan had always been quiet, the kind of young man who listened more than he spoke. He often came by to pick Ethan up for soccer practice or hang out after class, and he was always polite. But today there was something different in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" Claire asked as she wiped her hands on her apron. "You look like something's bothering you." Ryan hesitated for a moment, his gaze dropping to the flowers near his feet. "No, nothing bad," he said finally. "I just needed to clear my head a little." He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your garden's always peaceful. It helps me think." Claire softened. "It helps me too," she said, sitting down on the bench beside him. "Every flower here has a story. When I feel lost, I come here to remember what really matters." Ryan looked around, his expression thoughtful. "Ethan told me you planted all this by yourself. That's kind of amazing." "It took years," Claire said, her tone light, "but it was worth it. It's not just a garden, it's a part of me now." There was a brief silence between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unsaid. Ryan took a slow breath, his hands clasped together. "Mrs. Bennett," he began, then paused as if choosing his words carefully. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I probably should have said a while ago." Claire turned to him, her expression curious but calm. "You can tell me anything, Ryan," she said kindly. Before he could answer, the sound of a car engine broke the quiet. Headlights swept across the yard as Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. Ryan immediately stood up, his calm expression faltering. "Maybe another time," he said quickly, his voice suddenly uncertain. "I should probably talk to him first." Claire frowned slightly, sensing something important had been left unsaid. "All right," she said, trying not to sound disappointed. "Tell Ethan dinner's in an hour." Ryan nodded and walked toward the driveway. As he passed her, he gave her a small, polite smile, the kind that didn't quite hide the emotion behind it. "Good night, Mrs. Bennett," he said softly, before disappearing around the corner. Claire stood there for a moment, watching the garden lights flicker across the path. The sky was turning shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of rain. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan had wanted to say something deeper, something more personal. But she didn't press it. She told herself it was probably just some school problem or something about Ethan. Still, the way he looked at Ernest, hesitant, almost vulnerable, stayed with her. She picked up her groceries and went inside. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the garden. Ryan had always been different from Ethan's other friends. While most of them were loud and full of restless energy, Ryan was thoughtful, reserved, and often seemed older than his years. He had gone through some rough times, she remembered Ethan mentioning. That his parents had divorced a few years ago and that he had to move around a lot. Maybe that's why he valued quiet places like her garden. After dinner, when Ethan was in his room talking on the phone, Claire found herself glancing out the window. The bench where Ryan had been sitting was now empty, but the image of him sitting there lingered in her mind. The way the sunlight had caught his eyes. The way his voice had trembled slightly when he said he needed to talk it. All seemed strange now that she thought about it. She tried to brush it off, telling herself she was just overthinking. But a part of her knew something about that moment had shifted. Later that night, she went outside again. The garden was quiet except for the soft sound of wind moving through the leaves. The wooden bench was still damp from the evening dew. Claire sat down, running her fingers over the smooth wood, remembering how Ryan had sat in that exact spot earlier. There had been honesty in his eyes, something pure, but also heavy. Like he was carrying words he didn't know how to say. As she sat there, she thought about her own life. Her husband had passed away years ago, and since then, she had built her peace around her home and her son. But sometimes that peace felt like silence, beautiful but lonely. The garden had been her companion through those quiet years. It reminded her of patience, of growth, of life continuing even after loss. Maybe that's why Ryan's presence had felt comforting. He had that same quiet energy, that same need for something steady and safe. The sound of a nearby owl echoed softly as the night deepened. Claire looked up at the stars beginning to appear through the fading clouds. She didn't know what Ryan had wanted to say, but she knew she would see him again soon. He was close to Ethan, always around, always helping out. And next time, she thought, maybe she would ask Dot inside the house. The lights were warm and welcoming, but as she turned back toward the garden, Claire couldn't help but smile faintly. Something about that brief meeting had stirred a forgotten part of her heart. The part that still believed in simple human connections. In kindness, in the unspoken comfort of being seen and understood. That night, as she went to bed, she heard Ethan laughing in his room, probably talking to Ryan on the phone. She felt a small wave of warmth at the thought. Whatever it was that Ryan had been holding back, she hoped it wasn't something that would burden him. She hoped he would find peace, the same kind of peace she had found among her flowers. But deep down, she knew the story wasn't over. Ryan's eyes had said more than his words ever could. And though she didn't fully understand it yet, she sensed that his honesty, whenever it came, would change something in her heart. Maybe it would bring back memories she'd buried. Or maybe it would simply remind her that even in quiet gardens, life still had a way of surprising you. That night, as the wind brushed against her window and the scent of lilacs drifted through the air, Claire closed her eyes and let the sound of the garden lull her to sleep, unaware that tomorrow everything would begin to unfold. The next evening came quietly, carrying the soft chill of early spring. The rain had stopped and the air smelled fresh, like the world had been gently washed clean. Claire sat in her garden again, a warm cup of tea in her hands, watching the lights flicker across the petals of her flowers. She had been thinking about Ryan all day. His unexpected visit yesterday had stayed in her mind longer than she wanted to admit. There had been something in his eyes, something honest but uncertain that she couldn't quite forget as she sipped her tea. The creak of the garden gate caught her attention. She turned and saw Ryan walking in, holding a small wooden box. He looked nervous, almost hesitant, as though unsure if he should even be there. "Ryan," Claire said softly, setting her cup down. "I wasn't expecting you." He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced again. I just wanted to finish what I was trying to say yesterday." Claire studied him for a moment. There was sincerity in his tone, the kind that didn't come from rehearsed words. She gestured for him to sit beside her on the bench. "It's all right," she said kindly. "You can talk to me. What's on your mind?" Ryan took a seat, his fingers tracing the edge of the wooden box. For a few moments, he didn't speak. The only sound was the quiet hum of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, "I didn't know how to say this without sounding strange." Claire gave him an encouraging look. "Just be honest, Ryan. That's usually the best place to start." He took a slow breath. "I've known you for years, Mrs. Bennet. Ever since Ethan and I became friends. You've always been so kind to both of us. You always listened, even when no one else did. I don't know if you realize how rare that is." His words carried a weight that made Claire's heart tighten. She opened her mouth to speak, but he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "Sometimes when I come here, it feels like peace, like this house and your garden belong to a different world. I don't really have a place like this anywhere else." Claire's throat felt dry. She could sense how deeply he meant it. "Ryan," she said gently, That's very sweet of you. But you don't have to thank me for being kind. You're like family here. Ethan and I both care about you. Ryan nodded, but his eyes remained on the flowers. I know. I just wanted to say it. You've been there in ways you probably don't even realize. When my parents divorced, I used to come here and feel normal again. You'd ask how I was doing, and you actually meant it. He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. That kind of care stays with someone. Claire felt a soft ache in her chest. There was nothing inappropriate in his tone. It was gratitude mixed with something tender, something that came from a lonely heart finally finding warmth. She smiled kindly. Ryan, I'm glad if I've been able to help. Sometimes life gets heavy and all people really need is someone to listen. He looked at her then, really looked at her. His expression was calm but filled with something she couldn't quite define: respect, admiration, maybe even affection. That's exactly what I mean, he said quietly. You always make people feel seen. The silence that followed felt delicate, like a thread that could snap with the wrong word. Claire decided to shift the moment slightly to ease the weight of it. What's in the box? She asked with a small smile. Ryan blinked, almost forgetting he was holding it. Oh, this. He opened the lid and turned it toward her. Inside was a small wooden carving of a rose, perfectly shaped, each petal detailed and smooth. I made it, he said simply. I know you love your garden, so I thought you might like this. Claire stared at it, touched. You carved this yourself. He nodded shyly. It's not perfect, but it reminded me of you. Strong, calm, and patient like the roses you take care of. For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. Her eyes softened as she took the carving carefully from his hands. Ryan, it's beautiful. Truly. Thank you. He smiled faintly, relief washing over his face. I'm glad you like it. I didn't want it to seem weird or anything. I just wanted to give you something that would remind you how much you've helped me. Claire held the wooden rose in her hands, the light from the garden lamps glinting off its surface. It's not weird at all, she said sincerely. It's thoughtful. I'll treasure it. Ryan leaned back slightly, exhaling as though a weight had lifted from his shoulders. The tension in the air eased, replaced by a quiet warmth that neither of them tried to explain. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. You know, Claire said softly, when I was younger, I used to think gardens were just about beauty. But as I got older, I realized they're really about care. You plant something, nurture it, and hope it grows. It's a little like people, I guess. Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Maybe that's why I like it here so much. Everything feels alive, but peaceful at the same time. Claire smiled. That's the goal. Peace doesn't mean silence, it just means knowing you're where you're supposed to be. Ryan turned his head toward her, his voice quiet. That's what I feel when I'm here. For a heartbeat, Claire didn't know what to say. There was nothing inappropriate in his tone, just pure honesty. It was the kind of truth that came from someone who had been hurt and had finally found a place where he could breathe again. She didn't want to break that honesty, but she also knew she had to keep things clear. I'm glad you feel comfortable here, Ryan, she said softly. That's what this home has always been about, a safe place. He nodded, his gaze dropping again. You've built something special, Mrs. Bennet. I hope someday I can have a home that feels even half this peaceful. Claire smiled gently. You will. You're kind and patient. That's how peaceful homes are made. Ryan looked at her for a long moment, then stood up. I should go. Ethan's probably wondering where I am. Claire stood as well, still holding the little wooden rose. Thank you for coming by. And thank you for this. I'll keep it somewhere special. He smiled, soft, genuine. Good night, Mrs. Bennet. Good night, Ryan, she said, watching as he walked toward the gate. When the sound of the latch clicked and he was gone, Claire stood there under the garden lights, the wooden rose warm in her hand. There was something about that moment that felt different, like an invisible thread had been tied between them. It wasn't romantic, not in the way of youth, but it carried emotion, depth. and a kind of human closeness that words rarely captured. She placed the carving near the porch light where she could see it from her kitchen window. Then she went inside, but her mind stayed in the garden, replaying every word, every glance. Ryan's honesty had surprised her not because of what he said, but because of how deeply it came from the heart. It reminded her that sometimes people cross paths not to change each other's lives dramatically, but simply to remind one another of kindness, warmth, and truth. That night, as Claire turned off the lights and looked once more toward the glowing garden, she whispered softly to herself, "Honesty really does have its own beauty." And for the first time in a long while, she went to bed with a quiet, peaceful smile. The days that followed were quiet, but Claire felt the absence immediately. Ryan didn't stop by anymore. The garden, once a place of gentle comfort, suddenly felt too still. Every time she walked past the bench where he used to sit, she caught herself glancing toward the gate, half expecting to see him there with that shy smile and calm voice. But he didn't come. She told herself not to think about it, that he was probably busy with school or work. Yet something inside her missed the way he had made those small moments feel meaningful. One afternoon, while washing dishes, Claire overheard Ethan talking on the phone in the living room. His tone was casual, but his words caught her attention. "Yeah, Ryan said he might be moving soon," he said. "Got some job offer in Portland or something? I think he's still deciding." Claire froze for a second, her hands pausing midair. Moving? She hadn't heard anything about that. A small ache grew in her chest, unexpected but sharp. She didn't understand why it bothered her so much. Maybe it was because Ryan had become a quiet part of her days, someone who brought warmth to her garden talks and made her remember how kindness could fill empty spaces that evening. She went out to the garden again, hoping the air and flowers would calm her thoughts. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh soil and roses. As she walked toward the bench, she stopped suddenly. Ryan was there leaning against the wooden rail, hands in his pockets, looking out at the fading light. For a moment, Claire thought she was imagining him. "Ryan," she called softly. He turned, smiling faintly. "Hey, Mrs. Bennet." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried that same quiet emotion she remembered. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said, her tone gentle but laced with surprise. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he admitted, "but I wanted to say goodbye in person." Her heart dropped a little. "So it's true. You're leaving?" He nodded. "Yeah, got the job offer in Portland. It's a good chance for me. A fresh start. It's wonderful," she said, trying to sound happy for him. "You must be excited." "I am," he said quietly. "But leaving here? That's the hard part." Claire looked at him carefully, noticing how serious his face was, how his hands fidgeted slightly as he spoke. "Ryan," she said softly, "you've got your whole life ahead of you. It's natural to move forward." He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "That's not what I meant," he said. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, but before I go, I need to be honest with you." Her breath caught. The last time he had said those words, "want to be honest," he had left before explaining. This time, she could tell he wasn't going to walk away unfinished. He exhaled, gathering courage. "I care about you, Mrs. Bennet," he began. "I know there's an age difference, and I know it's not something I should say out loud, but it's the truth. You've been kind to me in a way no one else has. You made me feel seen, and that's something I'll never forget." Claire stood silent, her heart tightening. There was no disrespect in his words, just pure, raw honesty. The kind that came from a young man who had struggled, who had found comfort in someone's understanding. He wasn't confessing like a boy in love. He was speaking from the heart of someone who had learned to value goodness. "Ryan," she said finally, her tone calm and steady, "you've been through a lot. And sometimes when someone brings us peace, it feels like something deeper. But what you're feeling isn't wrong, it's human. You're drawn to kindness because you've needed it. And I'm glad if I've given you even a small piece of that." He looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. "Maybe you're right. he said quietly, but I couldn't leave without saying it. I didn't want it to become something I kept locked inside. You've made me see what genuine care looks like, and that's rare. Claire took a step closer, resting a gentle hand on his arm. You're a good person, Ryan, and honesty like that takes courage. But what you're really feeling is gratitude and connection, not confusion. You don't have to apologize for that. He looked up, meeting her eyes. It's still strange, isn't it? She smiled softly. Maybe, but not everything beautiful has to make sense. The wind moved through the roses, carrying their fragrance between them. Neither spoke for a moment, both lost in thought. The garden lights began to flicker on, surrounding them in a soft glow. Claire could see the struggle in his expression, the mix of affection, sadness, and peace that came from finally letting go of something unspoken. I'll miss this garden, Ryan said finally. It's where I learned how to breathe again. Claire nodded, her voice quiet. It'll always be here, waiting for new seasons. And you'll always be welcome here whenever you visit. He smiled faintly. You really mean that? I do, she said. No matter where you go, you'll always have people who care about you. Don't ever forget that. He gave a slow nod, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you, Mrs. Bennet, for everything, for listening, for being kind, for just being you. Claire felt emotion rising in her throat. You're very welcome, Ryan, and thank you for reminding me that small kindnesses still matter. He smiled again, that quiet, genuine smile she had come to recognize. Goodbye, Mrs. Bennet. Goodbye, Ryan, she said softly. He turned toward the gate, pausing once to look back. For a brief moment, their eyes met in the fading light, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then he was gone. Claire stood there for a while, listening to the echo of the gate latch, feeling the silence return. The garden seemed to hold its breath, the air still and tender. She sat on the bench, her hands resting on her lap, and let the evening sink in. There was no sadness, not really, just a quiet acceptance, a deep appreciation for the truth he had shared. His words had been unexpected, but they came from a good place, a place of honesty and respect. As the first stars began to appear, Claire realized that Ryan's confession hadn't unsettled her, had touched her. It reminded her that kindness, even when simple, could change people in quiet ways. She thought about how he had described her garden as peaceful, how he had said it felt like home. Maybe that was what she had created all along, a place where hearts could rest for a moment, no matter how lost they were. When she finally went back inside, the house felt warmer somehow. She placed her hand on the little wooden rose Ryan had carved for her, still sitting on the shelf near the window. The light from the porch reflected off it, soft and golden. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Be honest, be brave, and never lose that heart of yours." That night, she sat by her window for a long time, watching the garden swaying under the night breeze. Ryan's honesty had surprised her, yes, but more than that. It had reminded her that even fleeting connections can leave lasting warmth. It wasn't love, not in the way of stories, but it was something pure to souls meeting briefly and teaching each other something about truth, care, and courage. And as she finally turned off the lights and went to bed, she realized that honesty, when spoken from the heart, never truly leaves it, lingers like the scent of lilacs after the rain. A week had passed since Ryan left for Portland, and the Bennett house felt different. It wasn't loud before, but now the silence carried an emptiness Claire couldn't ignore. Ethan mentioned Ryan a few times, how his new job was going well, how he'd found a small apartment near the river, but Claire never said much. She just smiled, nodding, pretending the news didn't make her heart ache in a quiet, unexplainable way. Every evening, she still walked into the garden, tea in hand, out of habit. But the bench where Ryan used to sit now felt strangely distant, like a memory she wasn't ready to let go of. The first few days after he left, she kept expecting the garden gate to creak open. She imagined him walking in, apologetic smile on his face, hands in his pockets, ready to talk about something deep again. But it never happened. The garden was peaceful, yes, but not the same kind of peaceful it used to be. It was a silence that reminded her of absence, not calm. One morning, after a light rain, Claire stepped outside with her gardening gloves, ready to trim the roses. The air was fresh, the ground damp beneath her shoes, and a soft mist hung in the air. As she bent to pull out a few weeds, something caught her eye, a small wooden carving lying in the soil near her favorite rose bush. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was another rose hand-carved, delicate and slightly different from the one Ryan had given her before. For a moment she just stared at it, her heart beating fast. She looked around the garden as if expecting to see him standing there, but the space was empty. The wooden rose was smooth and newly made, the details fresh, the scent of varnish still faintly there. She knelt down and picked it up gently, her hands trembling. There was no note, no initials, just the carving quietly left behind. She turned it over in her palm, smiling through tears she hadn't realized were forming. It was just like Ryan to leave something like this, not dramatic, not loud, but honest. A silent message of gratitude, maybe closure, maybe something more. She didn't need words to understand it. It was his way of saying thank you, or goodbye. As she stood up, the wind brushed through the garden, carrying the faint scent of roses and rain. Claire looked around at the flowers swaying gently, the light glimmering through the droplets on their petals. Everything felt alive again. It's like the garden itself was speaking to her, softly reminding her that life keeps growing even after someone leaves. She carried the carving inside and placed it next to the first one Ryan had given her. They looked perfect together, two wooden roses, both shaped with care, both symbols of something simple yet meaningful. Claire ran her fingers over them, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was peace. She thought about Ryan's last words before leaving, how he had said he found comfort here, how he felt at home. Maybe that was why he'd left this second rose, to let her know that a part of him would always stay in that garden, that the peace he found here would travel with him. It touched her deeply, more than she expected. That afternoon, Claire brewed a pot of tea and took it out to the porch. The clouds had cleared and sunlight spilled across the yard. She sat quietly, watching the wind move through the flowers. The roses looked brighter, their petals glistening under the sun. She smiled softly, remembering how Ryan once said that her garden felt like a place from another world come, safe and full of heart. For a long while, she just sat there, letting her thoughts drift. Life had a way of surprising her. She hadn't expected a friendship or even an emotional connection. It's come from someone like Ryan Young, gentle, sincere in ways that most people had forgotten to be. He had reminded her that kindness could reach across ages, that human hearts could understand each other without boundaries or expectations. The days turned into weeks, and slowly Ryan became a fond memory. Ethan mentioned him less, though sometimes he'd bring up a story or a photo, and Claire would listen quietly, smiling. She didn't talk about what Ryan had told her that night in the garden. Some things, she believed, were meant to be kept quietly inside the heart. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Claire walked barefoot through the garden. The earth was soft beneath her feet, the air filled with the sound of distant birds and the soft hum of crickets. She paused by the bench where Ryan used to sit. The wood was slightly weathered, the same place where they had shared quiet conversations about life, loss, and dreams. She brushed her hand across the bench and whispered softly, "Thank you, Ryan, for reminding me to feel again." The truth was, Ryan had awakened something in her, a quiet awareness of how life continued to offer little sparks of meaning. Even after years of calm routine, his honesty had surprised her, yes, but it had also healed her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. It wasn't about love in the romantic sense. It was about connection, about being seen, about remembering that hearts never truly grow too old to feel warmth. She looked toward the roses again. The wooden carvings were still on the porch table, catching the last light of the evening. They seemed almost alive in that moment, glowing faintly under the sun's final rays. She smiled, whispering, "Your honesty will stay here always." The next morning, Ethan came into the kitchen as Claire prepared breakfast. "Mom," he said casually. Ryan texted. "He said Portland's nice, but he misses the garden. He said he hopes you're doing well." Claire looked up, her heart softening. "Tell him I said thank you," she replied, her tone calm but full of warmth. "And tell him the garden's still blooming." Ethan nodded, not noticing the emotion behind her words. As he left for work, Claire walked outside, holding her cup of coffee, and took one more look at the garden that had witnessed everything: the conversations, the silences, the goodbyes. The air felt fresh, full of promise. She took a deep breath and smiled. Life had a rhythm, people came and went, but what mattered was the kindness they left behind. Ryan's honesty had not been a confession of love, it had been a moment of truth, a rare gift that stayed in her heart like the scent of flowers after the rain. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, Claire bent down and placed the second wooden rose beside the first, right at the edge of the garden bed. "Let them stay here," she whispered. "This is where they belong." The roses gleamed under the sunlight, two small symbols of connection, one given in gratitude, the other left in silence. And as the breeze moved through the petals of her living roses, Claire felt a quiet peace settle inside her heart. Ryan was gone, but his honesty had rooted itself in her life, just like the flowers she tended, growing quietly, reminding her that even fleeting encounters can leave lasting warmth. She smiled, took a sip of her coffee, and turned her gaze toward the horizon, where new light was rising. The garden shimmered alive and full of heart once again, carrying his memory in every bloom.